While we have more details than before, we still have major outstanding questions in the David murder case. His movements, Celeste's movements, the alleged murder weapon, other potential charges on the horizon, who's going to testify, whether anyone else will be arrested or charged. We want to explore those unanswered questions right now. Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Jesse Weber. If you're watching this, if you're putting things out on social media, if you're into content creation, you might be wondering, how are we able to share so many of these clips from all of these stories, these breaking stories, so quickly? We use something called Opus Clip, okay? This is an all-in-one AI editor that makes it so easy to cut, create, and upload videos across any platform. Through AI, Opus Clip generates B-roll, it reframes footage, and it even cleans up audio, and it is so easy. You just visit opus.pro/sidebar, you sign up, you upload, and in minutes you will have perfectly edited clips ready to go for TikTok, Shorts, Reels. Opus Clip is really your one-stop shop, and having a tool like Opus Clip means that our producers can get you viral courtroom updates instantly. This is the most powerful tool there is to share ideas and edit like a pro. So go to opus.pro/sidebar to get a free week and then 50% off. Despite all the episodes that we have dedicated to David, you know we still have a bunch of unanswered questions. Will we ever get the real answers? Are we just going to have to wait and see what evidence the prosecution has? That's what I want to explore, what we don't know. The unanswered questions in the case of the 21-year-old romantic homicide singer accused of murdering, sexually abusing, and mutilating the remains of a 14-year-old girl named Celeste Rivas Hernandez. Now, the first thing I got to say when we mention unanswered questions, the murder weapon. The alleged murder weapon. What exactly did David allegedly use to kill Celeste? I mean, here's what prosecutors claim happened. According to the prosecution's pretrial brief, quote, knowing he had to silence the victim before she ruined his music career as she had threatened, very soon after her arrival at his home, which they say happened on April 23, 2025, defendant stabbed the victim to death multiple times and stood by while she bled out. No mention in that brief, as far as we could tell, about what exactly was used. You go to the medical examiner's report, the summary, it says death was pronounced at the scene. Autopsy examination was limited by extensive post-mortem changes. There are 2 penetrating wounds of the torso with smooth edges that may represent sharp force injuries. The wound on the upper abdomen penetrates the liver, and the wound on the left chest penetrates one of the left intercostal spaces with disruption of the adjacent ribs' cortical surfaces. The left lung appears intact. The bilateral upper and lower extremities show full thickness dismemberment. Multiple other skin and soft tissue defects are present without apparent associated internal injuries. The etiology of these defects is not clearly apparent due to severe post-mortem changes. Post-mortem toxicology performed on liver tissue shows the presence of a low level of ethanol, which may be due to post-mortem changes or ingestion and does not appear to be contributory to the cause of death. Given the history and circumstances as currently known by me and the setting of the findings by examination, ancillary studies, and in the absence of other definitive causes of death, the cause of death is multiple penetrating injuries. The manner of death is classified as homicide. But no murder weapon identified as far as we can see in this report. Now, is that a problem? Possibly for the prosecution. Look, the weapon's key. Normally, generally, you use the weapon to match it to the injuries that are sustained by the victim, and you may collect fingerprints or forensic material, DNA, on the weapon to possibly match it to the defendant. And without the weapon, it leads the defense to raise reasonable doubt, questions about reasonable doubt, about what happened, what was used, how did this happen. And I believe, and I've said this before and I'll say it again, I believe there is going to be a battle of experts in this case in terms of the cause of death and how Celeste died. And what complicates this is the decomposition and the dismemberment of her body, post-mortem injuries, post-mortem changes. So how can you definitively say what happened, right? That's going to be the battle between the experts, or at least what the defense is going to raise. And if you have no recovered murder weapon, possibly an issue. Although maybe the prosecution has something and they just haven't revealed it yet, we'll see. In a similar vein, when we talk about unanswered questions, the actual stabbing. Let me just read this to you again. Knowing he had to silence the victim before she ruined his music career as she had threatened, very soon after her arrival at his home, defendant stabbed the victim to death multiple times and stood by while she bled out. At no time did he call law enforcement or 911 or take her to an emergency room to attempt to save her life. Now, how do they know that? How do they know he just stood by and watched her bleed out? Well, we look at the timing of her arrival. They claim there was no further activity on her phone, that he allegedly sent her a text message 20 minutes after her supposed arrival, and they're looking at the ride-sharing receipts, asking where she was in this alleged text message, so that they would argue goes to the alibi. He's trying to create an alibi, cover his tracks. And this is, again, all according to the prosecution. Now, the prosecution may argue, hey, we're just putting two and two together, right, to say this is what happened. We know when she arrived, we know the text message, there was no outgoing calls to emergency services, so we are suggesting what may have happened, right? We're assuming what may have happened. But it is quite a statement to say he just stood by while she bled out. So I go back to this unanswered question, how exactly do they know that? And it's a question about the actual event of her supposed stabbing. Well, I asked forensic death investigator Joseph Scott Morgan, host of the Body Bags podcast, about this.
Back to that earlier point, how do they know that he stood there? Because, look, I got to tell you, as an old investigator, you know where I get that kind of information from? It's not from the perpetrator. To say someone stands there and watches an individual bleed out, that comes from a witness. And that's the one thing that's left me scratching my head over all of this. You know how? Because that is a huge leap. If you're talking about an investigative descriptor, that is such a leap to make that affirmative statement, because I can tell you when their feet are put to the fire relative to any kind of trial that's going to come about, that question is going to be asked and it is going to have to be answered. You said in the report right here that he stood there while she bled out. So unless they have internal cameras that bore witness to this, unless there was something that was caught on a Tesla, you know, that's the only other path I can really go down relative to that.
Unless they're just assuming this based on the idea of, look, we can say multiple penetrating wounds, right? I believe that's what they said the cause of death was, and they're saying we're putting two together, right? She allegedly came to the house at this time. We know that he allegedly sent a text to her phone 20 minutes later. We believe a sharp instrument was used, and so we are saying, of course, he stabbed her, and if he stabbed her, of course, he just waited for her to bleed out because he allegedly never called 911 or authorities, and so that's what they're assuming. But you're saying, in your experience, they shouldn't or wouldn't make that statement. There was no need to make that statement unless they have some sort of information.
Yeah, man, it's just such a huge leap, you know, to go down that road. For me, and I'm going to tell you, that is going to have to be revealed in court. And you know as well as anybody that you cannot just kind of, in some kind of pedestrian manner, you know, just go by and say, yeah, well, this is what happened. You're going to have to explain that. I mean, because people are going to want to know. This is arguably one of the most gruesome things that we've covered in some time. And I'm not saying it doesn't matter what people think, but I think that even the court is going to want that explained. If defense looks at this and said, how do they know that? They can't just say, well, we just know. They're going to have to lay that down, the facts, right? Just like in forensic science, we like to deal with the facts. We like to deal with those absolutes. When you get inside the courtroom, you have to state the facts of the case. And this is what they're saying is a fact of the case. So I'm going to be fascinated to see how this is explained, because I don't know, man. Inquiring minds want to know, right?
Again, an unanswered question. Talking about Celeste for a minute, okay? We have another unanswered question I want to get to. Was she pregnant? Was Celeste pregnant? The reason this has come up, and I've talked about it before, is when you go to the prosecution's pretrial brief, they write, text exchanges between the victim and defendant contain references to sex, pregnancy, abortion, and use of the Plan B emergency contraceptive. There are also explicit photographs documenting and corroborating their sexual relationship. In November 2024, defendant and the victim broke up, although they continued to communicate, and text messages suggest they also continued to have sexual relations. And then Celeste's death certificate was amended to suggest it was now unknown. It was unclear whether she was pregnant when she was killed. It was changed from not pregnant to unknown. Again, I spoke to Joseph Scott Morgan about this. He said it could just be the medical examiner's office having to put this down because look at the text messages. Look at this part of the conversation. Look at this part of the investigation. Given the state of her body, given these messages, we may not really know if she was pregnant. And you have to consider it if they're talking about Plan B and abortion and all this. But I'll highlight as well, and this is what Joseph said too, there's nothing in the actual coroner's report, the ME's report, to indicate that she was pregnant. You go to the report, It says uterus present and not enlarged and without endometrial lesions and hemorrhage, ovaries and fallopian tubes appropriate for age, or private area without lesions, breast tissue without lesions, other female reproductive tract findings, severe postmortem changes noted. Now, could it be possible? Maybe, but here's the thing, and I stand by this. If prosecutors had evidence that she was in fact pregnant, I have to imagine they would have said so, either in their initial press conference or their filings. Wouldn't they have had to include that? Because they're trying to prove special circumstances allegations, right? If you recall, they allege that David killed Celeste to silence her, that he lay in wait, that he killed her to protect his financially lucrative career, that she was about to expose him, seemingly about his alleged sexual relationship with her, her being a minor. Remember, he's charged with that sex crime as well. What better way to prove motive? What better way to prove these special circumstances? What better way to prove he had an illegal sexual relationship with a minor, that's the allegation, than to say, you want proof? She's pregnant. 14-year-old pregnant with his child? That's proof of a sex charge. That's proof of a motive. That's proof of a special circumstance, right? But they haven't done that. Now, again, she was apparently in such a state of decomposition and dismemberment, that's what could be complicated. But again, at this point, nothing definitively indicates she was pregnant. Unanswered question. By the way, unanswered questions, we really don't know what their supposed communications were about when you think about it. You know, the prosecution mentions that there are, quote, text message exchanges between defendant and the victim on April 22nd and April 23rd, 2025, where the victim threatened to expose defendant and destroy his career. And they say that, quote, April 23rd is the likely date that she was allegedly killed and when all her cellular activity ceased. The night prior, on April 22nd, 2025, the defendant and the victim engaged in a lengthy argument as detailed in their text messages. The messages revealed the victim's jealousy over defendant's relationships with other women. As defendant led her to believe they had a future together, she became extremely upset and threatened to disclose damaging information about her relationship with defendant to end his career and destroy his life. Defendant's first studio album was due to be released on April 25th, 2025. He had an emerging multi-million-dollar career already in progress. He also had multiple product endorsements, which were highly profitable. So that goes to the timing. But again, we don't know exactly the substance of these communications. We don't know what was said, whether they were in fact, let's say, for example, a real threat by Celeste or not. You wonder if the defense will challenge whether or not she was making a real threat or not. And the same goes for this. Numerous text messages between defendant and the victim evidencing their sexual relationship, pregnancy, abortion, and use of Plan B emergency contraception. Messages through March 2025 prove defendant continued to manipulate the victim. They do mention one message, or one alleged message, where it says, all we do is have sex and just hang out. Man, I want more than that for myself. And it says these messages were obtained from defendant's iCloud data. So yeah, you have one alleged message verbatim, but I don't know what the others say. And we may find out more about what these precise messages are during a preliminary hearing, and obviously, definitely during a trial. Another unanswered question. Where's David been? What's he been doing? You go back to the timeline here. September 9th, David, as part of his Withered tour, he performs at the Fillmore out in Minneapolis. Remember why this is important. This is after prosecutors claim he killed Celeste, dismembered her, put her remains in the Tesla that was near this property where he was reportedly staying. Then it was towed away, went to a tow yard, and that's where her remains were found in the front trunk, according to authorities. And he's on tour while all this is going on. September 16th, the Los Angeles medical examiner positively identified the body as that of Celeste through dental records. They also claim that she had a tattoo on her finger reading "shh," that is allegedly similar to a tattoo that David reportedly has. September 17th, detectives from LAPD Robbery Homicide Division, they serve a search warrant on this property that David was apparently staying at in the Hollywood Hills. They seize evidence. They apparently find DNA evidence inside the garage. Prosecutors also say they find evidence consistent with the dismemberment of the victim's body in the inflatable pool, which contained multiple linear cuts. Several biological samples, which tested positive for blood, were collected within the garage area. DNA analysis determined that various samples matched the victim's unique genetic profile. September 19th, 2025, David cancels his tour. From when he canceled his tour to April 16th, when he's arrested, no idea what he's been up to, right? I mean, April 16th, he's arrested, armed personnel, they take him from this Hollywood Hills home, just over a mile from the tow yard. And this is significant because we really hadn't had any clue where he was. He had been reportedly radio silent since he canceled that tour. Apparently made no public appearances. Was he at this property the entire time? What was he doing? Is there anything that he did, said, or communicated in all those months that could potentially be used against him as evidence at trial? Not sure. Another unanswered question. What Celeste was up to? You know, there's a discussion by prosecutors about these alleged trips that she took with David. But remember, 2024, April 2024 is when her family reports her missing from Lake Elsinore, and she had been reported missing 3 times in 2024. April 5th was the final time that she was reported missing. You go to May 2024, according to ABC7, she reportedly called home. June 2024, according to CNN, she was photographed backstage at one of David's LA shows. September 7th, 2024, she turns 14. September 8th, 2024, TMZ reportedly has video of Celeste engaged in some sort of altercation with people in her Lake Elsinore neighborhood. By the way, this is going to be a year to the day before her body's found. November 2024, according to the prosecution's brief, David, Celeste, they break up, they stay in touch. April 22nd, 23rd, 2025 is when the alleged crimes are committed. And there's a gap in time. I mean, it's reported that she may have been photographed in January of 2025, but the bottom line is, unanswered questions, we just don't know exactly what she was up to. I wonder if that's going to be explored by the prosecution in their case. Another unanswered question. Is anyone else going to be charged? I've had this question for a long time because right now David is the only one who's been charged in this case. And sure, based on the prosecution statements and the outline of potential evidence, it is possible that a 20-year-old singer killed, dismembered, and transported her body into a car all by himself without anyone knowing. Sure. But this also leads people to suspect, assuming the allegations are true, and he is innocent until proven guilty, but if the allegations are true, whether anyone else assisted or aided or conspired with him. I mean, here's a point. It goes back to the brief. It says surveillance video and other evidence confirmed defendant was the last person to drive the vehicle on July 29, 2025 before he left Los Angeles on a concert tour. Now, the defense's question where they might go is, did anyone else move the car after that? Her body wasn't reportedly found until September. Who else had access to that car? Who else could have had access to Celeste's remains? The filing states that David lied to friends, business associates, and others about the strong smell of decay in and around the home and the car. So maybe he did keep everybody in the dark, or did someone know something? I have to imagine the defense will cross-examine these potential witnesses. Very hard, question those conversations, question what David really said or didn't say, hearsay issues. And another way to look at this is it could be very difficult for defense attorneys to say, look, he was completely in the dark, had no idea what was happening, although is it possible someone else had access to the car afterwards? Goes to this idea of who may be a cooperating witness as well. If someone took an immunity deal to testify against David, that's going to be prime ground for attack by the defense. Why do you need protection? What were you offered? What were you guaranteed by the prosecution? Are you just pointing the finger at the big star here? Law enforcement had tunnel vision. You needed an arrest. They went after him. You're the person they're relying on. Aren't you really responsible? Now, yes, I'm speculating, but again, there's a lot of different alleged crimes here, and it does become a question, can one person do this all by themselves if the allegations are true? And did anybody have any knowledge, even of the purported, alleged, secret, illegal sexual relationship? Did anybody facilitate it, know about it, hide it? But just to give you an idea, Neil Langston, who we've talked about a lot on this program, David's reported friend who was arrested in Montana on a reported failure to appear as a witness charge, and he allegedly was brought back to LA to testify, seemingly in a grand jury. TMZ reported that he testified in front of an LA grand jury for 30 to 40 minutes. If that's true, that's a really short time, right? Important witness to be arrested, brought back, testify. I know grand juries are more limited in the presentation of evidence, but still, really short. Did he take a deal? Did he know anything? I don't know. I will say this, back on March 13th, 2026, Neil Langston posts private Instagram stories that reportedly read, "Thankfully, I'm legally fine in every way, and boy, do I got all my receipts for things. Ha 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 ha." And then he reportedly posted, "I think the worst part is that I've told so many people that I trust and I thought knew me as a person, my side of things, all for that to be thrown out the bleeping window as soon as I get arrested and they slap that bleep's name next to mine. And for the record, the thing I was arrested for wasn't even charged. They never filed it and my warrant was retracted because there's more to the story than what's on the news." And look, I asked Los Angeles DA, the district attorney, Nathan Hochman, about this on my News Nation show, Jesse Weber Live. And he said in terms of others being involved or being charged, we have an ongoing investigation. If anyone has information, come forward. And he said with respect to Neil Langston, take a look.
I'm not going to comment one way or the other about any particular additional individuals or whether there are any additional individuals. What we did with respect to individuals who wanted to either cooperate with our investigation or were uncooperative is that they often receive subpoenas to come in and testify in order for us to get the information to make the decision we made today to file these charges.
So look, I'm not sure whether others will be charged at this point, but an unanswered question nonetheless. Another unanswered question is David's family. What about David's family? His father, DeWood, his mother, Colleen, brother, Caleb. After David's arrest, his parents, through a family attorney, released a statement that said, quote, "Parents are sad and disappointed that David was arrested. However, they fully stand behind him and believe that he is innocent. They fully support him." But will they be involved in this case? Will they have to testify? It's interesting to think about because in the prosecution's brief, it states throughout 2024, the victim spent a significant amount of time with defendant, including summer weekends at his home in the Hollywood Hills and traveling with him to Las Vegas, London, and Texas to meet his family. That's where his family lives. Now, it's unclear how much his family, knew about Celeste, if they knew anything about her, whether they were aware of this, whether they were aware of how young she was. But we do know that the family was reportedly ordered to come to LA and testify before a grand jury. And remember when the Department of Transportation reportedly impounded the Tesla out in LA, according to authorities, it was noted that it was registered to David in Hempstead, Texas. We know his family lives in Texas. TMZ later reported that David had transferred properties to his mother's name out in Texas after Celeste's remains were found. Questionable about why he did this, right, if that's true. But in court filings about this whole back and forth about whether or not they had to go to LA and testify, there was a court hearing, and this is what Bennett Dodson, assistant DA for Waller County out in Texas, told the court. Don't think it's a secret to anyone at this point that Mr. David Burke is a musician who's quite famous, and this matter concerns a car that was registered to him at these witnesses' address here in Houston that had a dismembered, decomposing body in it. I would say if a car with a dismembered, decomposing body is registered to your home address, that is something you should expect to be questioned by the authorities about, and that's what this is, Judge. So you get a sense of why their testimony could be vital, what they may be questioned about. It does become a question. Would they plead the fifth? How they would testify? It's hard to know at this point. That's why it's an unanswered question, whatever the family's connection to this case will be. Another unanswered question. Could David face federal criminal charges? I did a whole sidebar on this, but just to give you an idea, on April 23rd, 2026, in a follow-up court hearing, we learned from the prosecution that there was reportedly a, quote, significant amount of child pornography found on David's device or devices. And you go back to the pretrial brief, from the evidence list, it says the description of photographs depicting the victim naked, as well as while she was engaged with defendant in sexual activity when she was 13. They said that this constitutes CSAM, child sexual abuse material. They indicated the photos won't be presented. And then this part, while all possible charges that could be proven were not filed, the CSAM is proof of their ongoing sexual relationship while the victim was 13 and 14 years old. If you look up federal charges here, I looked it up. 18 U.S.C. 2251, sexual exploitation of children. 2252, certain activities relating to material involving the sexual exploitation of minors. 2252A, certain activities relating to material constituting or containing child pornography. And I looked under the DOJ's website. They basically say images of child pornography are not protected under First Amendment rights and are illegal contraband under federal law. Section 2256 defines child pornography as any visual depiction of sexually explicit conduct involving a minor, someone under 18 years of age. Visual depictions include photographs, videos, digital or computer-generated images distinguishable from an actual minor, and images created, adapted, or modified but appear to depict an identifiable actual minor. Federal jurisdiction is impacted if the child pornography offense occurred in interstate or foreign commerce. So this includes, for example, using the U.S. mails or common carriers to transport child pornography across state or international borders. Additionally, federal jurisdiction almost always applies when the internet is used to commit a child pornography violation. Even if the child pornography image itself did not travel across state or international borders, federal law may be implicated if the material, such as the computer used to download the image or the CD-ROM used to store the image, originated or previously traveled in interstate or foreign commerce. And then it goes, any violation of federal child pornography law is a serious crime. Convicted offenders face severe statutory penalties. For example, a first-time offender convicted of producing child pornography faces statutory minimum of 15 years to 30 years maximum in prison. A first-time offender convicted of transporting child pornography faces fines and a statutory minimum of 5 years to 20 years in prison. Convicted offenders may face harsher penalties if the offender has prior convictions. Okay, so on top of that, the alleged child porn, here's a thought. Sex trafficking. What about that charge? Transporting a minor across state lines, international lines, to engage in commercial sex acts, force, fraud, coercion, threats, inducement. Was he buying things for her, paying for her trips? Was there a thing of value? So you would need evidence of not only a sexual relationship, but this travel component, right? Maybe a commercial aspect. And you go back to the filings, despite being informed by law enforcement, the victim was only 13, defendant continued to pursue her. That is from the prosecution's brief as well, and they talk about the timeline there. Now, I asked former federal prosecutor Gene Rossi about potential federal charges. Here's what he had to say.
It's not automatically, but it sure points towards federal involvement. And there are 2 federal charges that could occur here, and I'll get to a third in a moment. But I want to go to the child pornography. They have seized 8 terabytes of information from his iCloud account. They've only reviewed 1 terabyte. So they got 7 more terabytes to go where they could even enhance the murder charge and also child pornography. But go to feds. The U.S. Attorney or the Department of Justice could charge him, theoretically, with possession of child porn and or production of child porn. Possession is a 5-year minimum. The production is, I think, a 15-year minimum. I could be wrong on that, but I think it's 10 to 15 years. But it's a minimum. That could be enough. Because here's why. Because the interstate nexus for child pornography cases, and actually any federal crime, the bar is very low in terms of affecting interstate commerce. If you use your iCloud, if you use a computer, if you use the mails, it's almost inevitable you're going to invoke a federal jurisdiction via the commerce, affecting commerce. So that doesn't bother me one bit in terms of the affecting interstate commerce. I did want to add this. The intent here would be circumstantial. You probably don't have any admissions from Mr. Burke. I'm going to call him Mr. Burke. So you really, just his possession would satisfy the elements of either intentional, knowingly, and or willfully possessing this material or transporting it or producing. It sounds like he took it up a notch and he was producing this child porn. He just wasn't receiving it. Go to the Diddy trial in the Southern District of New York. He had a RICO count, he had a Mann count, and he had sex trafficking involving violence. I don't think you have RICO here, but you could have a Mann Act. Mann Act is, I'm in Washington, D.C. I call a lady of the night in L.A. Hey, I'll pay your airfare and hotel. Come here and we'll have physical relationship. That's a Mann Act violation. There's no threats. There's no violence. If you add violence, that's sex trafficking involving violence or the threat of violence. We could have that. Sex trafficking doesn't have an age. Mann Act doesn't have an age. So those are 2 federal charges that could apply.
Does he have to promise her something? Does he have to give her something of value? Does he have to give her money? Does he have to, is it paying for the trips? Because isn't that a key component of a sex trafficking case? I don't know if it's different if you're talking about minors.
The jury instructions for the Mann Act and the sex trafficking is very broad. It could be entice. Entice could be you're just the verbal persuasion. It could be a financial gain. It's very broad how you entice somebody to cross state lines for either Mann Act purposes or sex trafficking purposes. The other charge that could possibly occur here is federally, is kidnapping. It appears that she may have been lured to his apartment across state lines, and that for the purpose of kidnapping her, not letting her go, and then he abused her and he killed her. Kidnapping resulting in death is at federal level.
Would it still be federal? Would it still be federal if she came from Lake Elsinore, California, to the Hollywood Hills in California?
No, but we don't know if she went to another state and he was communicating with her. We don't know. We got 8 terabytes of information. We have 7 more terabytes to go. We don't know that.
Okay, so there you go. Some unanswered questions. We will see if we get answers anytime soon. That's all we have for you right now here on Sidebar, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. And as always, please subscribe on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. You can also check us out on NBC's Peacock as well. If you want to follow me, X, Instagram, my News Nation show, Jesse Weber Live, Monday through Friday, 11 p.m. Eastern. I'll see you next time, everybody.